Japan is famous for bullet trains, neon-drenched futuristic cities, and anime. But just 170 years ago, if a Japanese citizen built a boat big enough to sail overseas, the government executed them on the spot. For over 2 centuries, Japan completely severed itself from the outside world. No foreigners came in, no citizens left, and anyone who broke the rules paid with their lives. Yet today, this tiny island nation is one of the most technologically advanced countries on Earth. So, how did an island ruled by sword-wielding samurai transform from a secluded feudal kingdom into a global superpower and survive total nuclear destruction along the way? To understand Japan's bizarre journey, we have to rewind 2,000 years back to the beginning. Back in 300 BC, Japan wasn't a unified country. It was a collection of scattered rice-farming clans called the Yayoi. These early clans shared a spiritual belief system that shaped their identity forever: Shinto, or the way of the gods. They believed nature, from ancient trees to giant mountains, was inhabited by divine spirits called kami. Among these clans, one family claimed something extraordinary. The Yamato clan asserted that their chief was a direct descendant of Amaterasu, the sun goddess herself. And when your great-grandmother is literally the sun, nobody really argues with you. In 660 BC, legend says Jimmu became the first official emperor of Japan, starting the longest unbroken imperial line in human history. By the 6th century AD, Japan looked across the sea at a giant neighbor, China. China was massive, wealthy, and possessed writing, philosophy, and formidable armies. The Japanese realized that to survive, they needed to adapt, so they borrowed everything. They adopted Chinese writing characters, embraced Buddhism alongside Shinto, and copied the Chinese imperial model. Look at China. They have books, grand palaces, and sophisticated laws. Should we fight them? No. Let's copy everything they do. By 794 AD, the imperial court settled in a new capital called Heian-kyo, modern-day Kyoto. This Heian era became a golden age of art, poetry, and aristocratic luxury. Imperial nobles spent their days wearing 12-layer silk kimonos, writing poetry about cherry blossoms, and completely ignoring the rest of the country. While the emperor and courtiers were busy admiring flowers in Kyoto, they forgot one detail: who was running the countryside? Out in the provinces, bandits raided villages and local lords fought over farmland. To protect their land, wealthy landowners hired trained bodyguards skilled in archery, horsemanship, and the blade. They lived by absolute loyalty and discipline. They were called the samurai, meaning those who serve. And very soon, these swordsmen realized something game-changing. Why take orders from poets in Kyoto when we hold all the weapons? In 1185, a warrior named Minamoto no Yoritomo crushed his rivals and established the country's first military government in Kamakura. He took the title of shogun, meaning supreme military commander. From that moment, the emperor became a spiritual figurehead in Kyoto, while the shogun held absolute real power. Japan was now officially a samurai state. For a century, samurai ruled supreme. But in 1274, a terrifying threat appeared on the horizon: the Mongol Empire. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, had conquered China and Korea and demanded Japan's total submission. The samurai refused. Kublai Khan sent 900 ships and 40,000 soldiers. The Mongols used catapults, gunpowder bombs, and coordinated formation tactics that overwhelmed samurai duelists. But just as the invasion force landed, a colossal typhoon swept across the sea, destroying the Mongol fleet. Kublai Khan returned in 1281 with a massive fleet of 4,400 ships and 140,000 troops, the largest amphibious invasion in human history until D-Day. Samurai fought desperately on coastal walls for weeks. Then, once again, another massive typhoon materialized from nowhere and annihilated the Mongol armada. The Japanese hailed these mysterious storms as divine intervention, kamikaze, meaning divine wind. Sir, the Mongols returned with 140,000 men. Send in the navy? No need. A typhoon just deleted their entire fleet. Though Japan survived, defending against the Mongols bankrupted the shogunate. By 1467, central authority completely collapsed into 100 years of brutal civil war known as the Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period. Warlords called daimyo carved Japan into rival fiefdoms. Castles burned, brother betrayed brother, and ninja assassins operated in the shadows. In 1543, a storm blew a Portuguese ship onto Japanese shores, introducing two novelties: Christianity and firearms. While many samurai despised matchlocks as unhonorable, one ruthless warlord embraced them: Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga equipped thousands of peasants with muskets. At Nagashino, in 1575, his gunners obliterated the elite Takeda samurai cavalry. Nobunaga brutally unified half of Japan before being betrayed and forced into ritual suicide. His loyal general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, finished unifying the country. Hideyoshi disarmed all peasants, enforcing a rigid caste system where only samurai carried swords. But Hideyoshi's megalomania led him to invade Korea in the 1590s, ending in a disastrous stalemate. When Hideyoshi died, a cunning warlord named Tokugawa Ieyasu seized power at the bloody Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. Ieyasu became shogun and moved the capital to Edo, the city now known as Tokyo. To ensure perpetual rule, the Tokugawa clan instituted the most extreme isolation policy in history: Sakoku, or closed country. By the 1630s, the shogunate banned Christianity, expelled foreign traders, and prohibited citizens from leaving under penalty of death. Building ocean-going ships was outlawed. For 220 years, Japan froze itself in time. Only a handful of Dutch merchants were allowed on a tiny artificial island in Nagasaki called Dejima. What if a Japanese sailor gets shipwrecked overseas and returns? We execute him, of course. Foreign ideas are contagious. Inside this sealed pressure cooker, Japan enjoyed 2.5 centuries of peace. Samurai transformed from killers into administrators. Edo grew into a vibrant metropolis with kabuki theater, geishas, and sumo. But while Japan contemplated tea ceremonies, the West underwent the Industrial Revolution, inventing steam engines and rifled artillery. On July 8, 1853, Japan's peaceful illusion shattered. 4 steam-powered warships, painted pitch black, sailed into Edo Bay. They were led by American Commodore Matthew Perry. Armed with explosive Passions cannons, Perry delivered an ultimatum: open your ports for trade, or we level your city. The shogunate panicked. Samurai swords were useless against modern Western ironclads. Look at those giant smoking monsters. Should we fight them with katanas? No. Their cannons reached the palace from the bay. Perry's black ships forced Japan to sign unequal treaties. The humiliation triggered civil war. Young samurai realized the shogunate was weak. In 1868, after the Boshin War, the Tokugawa shogunate collapsed. Power was restored to the young Emperor Meiji, triggering the most aggressive modernization drive in history, the Meiji Restoration. In just 3 decades, Japan dismantled 700 years of samurai feudalism. Samurai topknots were cut off, swords banned, and a conscript army formed. Scholars traveled to Europe and America to copy factories, navies, and laws. Japan built railways and telegraph lines at warp speed. By 1905, Japan shocked the world by defeating the Russian Empire in the Russo-Japanese War, the first modern victory of an Asian nation over a European power. Having defeated Russia, Japan learned a dangerous lesson. Military power brings prestige and territory. But as Japan industrialized, its leaders realized a fatal flaw. Japan's mountainous islands had almost no natural resources: no oil, no iron, and no rubber. To fuel its growing empire, Japan had to conquer them. Throughout the 1930s, ultra-nationalist military factions assassinated moderate politicians and seized control of the government. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, and by 1937, launched a full-scale invasion of China. The atrocities were horrific, including the brutal rape of Nanking. Alarmed by Japanese aggression, the United States imposed a total oil embargo in 1941. Japan had less than 2 years of oil reserves left. Military leaders faced a choice: back down and withdraw from China, or go to war with the world's greatest industrial giant. They chose war. On December 7, 1941, Japanese bombers launched a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, crippling American battleships. If we destroy their fleet, America will lose heart and sign a peace treaty. Are you sure about that? Positive. They don't have the stomach for a long war. Spoiler alert, America definitely had the stomach. Within 6 months, Japanese forces swept across Southeast Asia, capturing the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and Indonesia. But the tide turned rapidly at the Battle of Midway in 1942, where Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. As American forces waged a relentless island-hopping campaign, Japanese resistance grew increasingly desperate. Drawing on ancient samurai warrior code, soldiers refused to surrender, mounting suicidal banzai charges. In 1944, Japan unleashed kamikaze suicide pilots, deliberately crashing explosives-laden planes into American warships. By 1945, American bombers flattened Japanese cities with incendiary raids, yet the Military Council refused unconditional surrender. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped the world's first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, vaporizing 70,000 people instantly. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb detonated over Nagasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito delivered a shocking radio broadcast, surrendering unconditionally. The first time ordinary Japanese citizens had ever heard their emperor's voice. World War II left Japan in absolute ruins. Millions were dead, cities were reduced to ash, and for the first time in its 2,000-year history, Japan was occupied by a foreign power. American General Douglas MacArthur took control of the country, acting as a virtual modern shogun. MacArthur drafted a new pacifist constitution. Article 9 explicitly outlawed war as a sovereign right of the nation, forbidding Japan from maintaining a military with war potential. The divine Emperor Hirohito was stripped of political power and forced to declare publicly that he was human, not a god. "You are officially human now, Your Majesty. Does this mean I don't have to wear the heavy crown anymore?" Yes, and no more conquering neighbors. Stripped of its military, Japan pivoted 100% of its national energy toward industry, engineering, and innovation. What followed was the Japanese economic miracle. By the 1960s, Japanese companies like Sony, Toyota, Honda, and Panasonic began flooding global markets with high-quality electronics and fuel-efficient automobiles. In 1964, Tokyo hosted the Summer Olympics, debuting the Shinkansen bullet train, traveling at a mind-boggling 130 miles per hour, showcasing to the world that Japan had risen from atomic ashes into a futuristic powerhouse. By the 1980s, Japan possessed the second-largest economy on Earth. American corporations panicked, fearing Japan would buy up the entire U.S. real estate market. While the economic bubble burst in the 1990s, Japan launched a new kind of global conquest: cultural soft power. Through anime, video games like Nintendo and PlayStation, sushi, and manga, Japanese culture captivated millions of fans worldwide. A nation that once used swords and warships to conquer territory was now conquering global culture with Mario, Pikachu, and Studio Ghibli. Today, Japan stands as a living paradox. It is a land where 1,000-year-old Shinto shrines sit quietly next to neon-lit skyscrapers, where robot waiters serve customers in tea shops, and where ancient samurai discipline lives on in modern corporate work ethic. But Japan faces new existential challenges: a rapidly aging population, declining birth rates, and quiet towns slowly disappearing. Yet, if 2,000 years of history have proven anything, it's that Japan always finds a way to reinvent itself when backed into a corner. Drop your thoughts in the comments, telling us which Japanese historical era shocked you the most. Was it the divine typhoons, Perry's black ships, or the samurai transition?